This lesson, we're going to be creating a sample invoice using the mathematical operators where we're taking a value of cost and quantity, creating a subtotal from the two cells, the values of those cells, and then we're also applying that same formula to the following rows of content to create the totals for the subtotal. We're also calculating the tax on each line where we're taking the subtotal amount, multiplying it by 0.13 to create the 13% tax on the items. And down at the bottom, we're calculating all of the subtotals together, the sum of the subtotals. We're adding in shipping, as well as calculating the sum of all of the rows of tax and creating a final total for the invoice. And this is all done with the mathematical operators as formulas within the spreadsheet. And as you adjust the values for the quantity, that's going to get reflected within the tax and the subtotal and the total. So all of the numbers will adjust. You can also update the cost, and that will as well be reflected within the calculated totals that are going to be changing depending on what the value that you've entered into the cost and quantity is going to be. Using Google formulas, you can do simple math operators. I've created a sample invoice that you might have, and we're going to do math operators in order to calculate the tax, the subtotals, and the totals for this receipt. With simplest formulas is to use the math operators. And the math operators can be created simply by selecting the cell and then going into the formula bar and doing an equal sign. And within the equal sign, we can do rounded brackets and then enter in the math that we want to apply. And once we hit enter, it's going to complete the calculation. All of the formulas will start with the equal sign. For multiplication, we're going to be using the asterisk, which will complete this calculation that's contained within the rounded brackets. You can also use values from the cells, which we are going to be using in this example. For instance, if we want to create the subtotal, where we've got the cost and then the quantity, that means that we're taking the cost and we're multiplying it by the quantity in order to create the subtotal. So let's create the formula for that, where we start with the equal sign and set the rounded brackets, then select the cells that we want to use. So in this case, B2, which it will now highlight in orange. We want to add, or we want to multiply by the quantity, which is contained within C2. And once we hit enter, it will provide us the value. And also Google Sheets will provide the suggested autofill. If we hit the checkbox or enter, it will complete the autofill on those additional following cells. So now if we go in and if we update the quantity, it will also update the subtotals within column E. We can also update these and format it to be as currency formatted, and then also in addition update the cost and set the format for those to be currency. We also want to add in the tax of 13%. We're going to create the formula for the tax. So starting with the equal sign, the rounded brackets, we're going to select the value from B2, multiply that by the value from C2, and that's where we can get the subtotal. I'm going to add in another bracket because I want to get the total of B2 times C2, and let's multiply that by 0.13 in order to get the percentage value. So that will give us the percentage of 13% off of that total. And we can drag it down in order to apply that same formula for those cells that are incrementing. So instead of B2 and C2, it will use B3 and C3 and still multiply it by the 13%. So this gives us a running total of the tax value that we're calculating. And if we do make any updates to the quantity, it will be reflected within the tax and the subtotal. We could have also taken the subtotal amount and just multiplied it by 13, so that would produce the same result. So we could take the value from column E and multiply it by 0.13, and this actually should be E2. So that produces the same values, and they're still going to adjust the same way as we just saw. So if we do update those quantities, it's going to update the subtotal, and that's also going to be reflected in the tax. So let's get the totals that we have for the subtotals and the tax. I'm going to move these over just one column and then take the subtotal. So the subtotal is going to be a sum of all of these values. So instead of doing value E2 plus E3 plus E4 plus E5, E6, and E7, we can do a sum of the entire range, which is going to be a lot easier. And that's where we can use the sum keyword in order to accomplish that, and then summarizing and creating the sum for the entire range. So it's already being suggested here within the formula bar. In order to accept the suggestion, we just hit enter. And because we want this form, if we do add in additional content in the following rows, we want it to go all the way down to number 7. So let's adjust this to be E7. So that will create a subtotal for all of these values that we have here. We want to also create a value for the tax. So again, we can create a sum for that of all of the numbers in the cells. We need to select the range. Now we can use the mouse in order to select the range that we want to apply this to, and then close off with the other rounded bracket. And once we hit enter, that's going to create the total for the tax. It does have a suggested autofill. So in this case, the formula that it's trying to suggest is not going to be correct because we actually want to add the subtotal, the tax, in order to create the total. So let's press the X here to reject the suggestion. And for here, we're going to be doing a sum of the top values. There's also another way to do the sum. And under More, if you select the Functions icon, you can select the sum that way, and that will automatically add that into the formula bar. And then you can select the range, press enter, and that will summarize all of these as the total. I've added in an additional row here. So if we do want shipping, we can create a value for the shipping. And here we can enter in a number for shipping. So if we wanted $15 for shipping, let's also update this format to be currency. And that amount for shipping now gets added into the total because it's within the range of E8 to E10. So if we were to update the shipping costs, that would also still be reflected within the total. Now you can bold the total or make it larger so it stands out more. And we've successfully created a dynamic invoice that can change if we change any of the values here of the quantities or even the costs that we're charging per item. It will automatically calculate the tax, the subtotals, and then the final total that's owed on this particular invoice.